everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today with my friends from allfreeknitting.com I'm going to show you a fun and unique way to dye yarn, the cake dyeing method. Now Rebecca, you may ask, why are you winding a cake on your yarn winder from an already wound ball of yarn? Well, sometimes when you wind a ball of yarn directly from a yarn swift, like you see, I guess you can see mine, the bottom of mine back there, it ends up being really tight. And I really want the yarn this time to be nice and loose, because instead of putting a hank or a skein in the dye bath, we're going to be putting a whole cake of yarn in the dye bath. And so we're going to get, hopefully, the yarn on the outside and the top and bottom will get the most dye, and so then this will give us a really interesting colorway. Alright, I have my pot of water heating, and to it I'm going to add, 4 tablespoons of white vinegar. It's not, exact science, but since the color I'm dyeing is a green and blues take a lot longer and more acid to absorb, I want to make sure I have enough acid. And now I'm adding some leftover food coloring dye that came from a previous dyeing experiment. You can use any type of food coloring, as long as you can dissolve it in a liquid, I suppose. I'm a bit worried that I filled my pot a little too full. So I'm actually, once I stir it, I want there to be enough space to add my yarn. The water is not yet hot. I'm just going to remove some of the dye bath and set it aside. When I add my yarn, I can add liquid to make sure that the cake is completely covered. And so now we wait until this water comes just to a simmer, and then we're going to add the cake dry. The reason why I'm choosing to add the cake dry is because since it's so loose, I would like there to still be some white areas, and if the yarn is already wet, then that'll help the dyes wick in. But also this will give us a bit of variation within the tones of the amounts that receive the same amount of dye, such as you've seen in my kettle dyeing tutorials. Here's my beautiful loose cake of yarn, and you can see even there's a lot of access to the center. So this is going to be so much fun. So the dye bath has now started to simmer. And I'm going to take our dry large cake and place it gently to the pot. Now I'm going to need to use tongs to submerge it, and you can see that some dye has come up in the center. So I am, because of the levels, I am going to add some of this dye that I removed. Careful. Submerge, submerge, submerge. Alright, I would say that that is pretty well submerged. And now I'm going to bring it back to a light simmer, reduce the heat, and wait. Alright, it's been about 10 minutes, and I turn down the heat a bit more because I'm at to a bit of a roaring boil. You kind of see the dye is starting to clear a bit, but there's still a fair amount of blue in there. So I'm going to let this go for another 10 minutes. But what is kind of nice is it does look like there might be some different coloration towards the center. Our yarn has now been cooking for about 20 minutes. There's still some color in the dye bath, but most of it is in the yarn. I've turned off the heat, and I'm going to allow this to cool slowly while remaining in the dye bath to allow any extra dye to absorb. So the water is now completely clear, and to help speed along with cooling off my cake. Wow, this is not what I expected for color, but it's really cool. Using tongs to lift it out of the former dye bath, and I'm putting it, on a heat-safe plate. I know that this is colored because it wasn't exposed to the water, but already I'm very excited. So I'm going to let this cool down before rinsing it. But I'm curious. Oh, it does look like that blue kind of color goes down. Anyway, we will check back with this once it's cooled down and I've rinsed it. So we're washing the skein with lukewarm water and a little bit of dish soap. I'm going to wait to unwind the skein until after it's dried a bit because I don't want to stretch out the fibers too much. Yeah, but it's a bit hard to see, but there's a layer of black and we go to some blue. So I don't think we have any white in here because I had a lot of dye, but I do think that we certainly achieved a multicolored effect, like I was hoping that we would. Our skein from cake dyeing is not completely dry, so it's still a bit damp. So I'm going to start winding it onto a niddy noddy, and once I've done that, we'll be able to see a bunch of the color changes more clearly. But just to show you, from peeking in, there is no white left in here, and that's because I used a ton of dye, and I wound it nice and loose. But in your own cake dyeing experiments, you may end up with, instead of a different color center, you might end up with a more white center. And the reason why the tone changes is there was some black in my dye. And so black is composed of lots of colors and of lots of different color dyes, and reddish tones absorb the fastest, and blue colors take a lot longer to absorb. And so this is why we've got more of a reddish brown around the outside and it goes bluer towards the center. So we have our cake dyed skein now wrapped around a niddy noddy, and I'm hoping that this can give you a better sense of all the colors. So you don't have a continuous gradient where it goes from the blue to the brown. Individual pieces of the yarn, it's hard to see, but they go from, each individual piece goes from dark to light. So it's a variegated colorway, but gradually you get more and more of this dark brown and less of the paler brown and blue. And so what you'll get each time will be individual, because it's not just the amount of dye that is a component, but it's how you wound your skein, how loosely, how consistently, and yeah. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial on cake dyeing. I cannot wait to knit up my yarn. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and this video was brought to you by allfreeknitting.com.